Teachers, how easy is it to tell if a student has a crush on another? And what is the funniest/saddest moment between the two you can share? Hey folks, one of my patented Mr. Facts asides for you. Uploads have been a little slow as I'm dealing with some jaw and throat issues, so I might be a little more low-key in my delivery here. Bear with me as I ease back into things. I appreciate you. Story 1. Miguel asked me, the AP Chem teacher, if he could write a message on the board for Mariela. Miguel was a former AP student and at the time a senior. Mariela was a current AP student and at the time a junior. Miguel, using elements from the periodic table, asked Mariela to go to the senior banquet, the biggest to-do at our school. And then Miguel asked if I would record it on my phone while he asks her. I said sure thing and was glad to help. Both were great people and good students. Miguel, during class, goes into this big, long show asking Mariela. After he's done, Mariela stands up, looks straight at the phone, and says, no. She then sat back down. Before this started, I thought there was no way Miguel would endure public humiliation unless he knew for sure Mariela would say yes. As soon as she said no, there was nothing but silence. Miguel literally dropped his head and slinked out of the room. Mariela didn't flinch. I die laughing every time I watch that video. Greatest moment of my teaching career. Oofda. Man, look, when you make a big public display of asking someone out, that comes with major risks. Though honestly, folks, be careful asking people out like that because some folks are going to feel pressured to say yes so as not to make a scene, and you don't want to get a date that way. Maybe if their friends tell you they really want to go out with you and are waiting for you to ask, it might be okay then, but asking people out is high pressure enough without an audience. Story 2. This is one of my most treasured memories as a teacher. I was a student teacher, so I was not prepared for this. I asked my students to write and share their own poetry. We focused on sensory imagery, and I had the presentation staged at the local university for a bit more gravitas. Some were funny, some were surprisingly beautiful, but most were banal, and the exercise was mostly boring. This one girl got up in front of the class, visibly shaking. She was near tears for her entire poem. I wanted to help her, but I had no idea what to do, so I just watched like everyone else as she poured her heart out to a boy in the class who did not reciprocate. When she finished, there was a silence in the room, and after a few seconds, which seemed to stretch out forever, one of her friends stood up and ushered her out of class as the tears began to flow. Nobody made fun of her, but the boy also didn't show that he felt the same. It was just out there with no commentary. It is, to this day, one of the bravest acts I have ever witnessed. That girl has taken one of the biggest emotional steps one can take. I hope she's a stronger person now because of it. Huge props to that girl for facing a major fear. Now, still gonna call out the doing stuff publicly because that's a lot of pressure to put on someone, but she was just declaring feelings, so, well, she took a hell of a risk and it didn't pay off. Not to mention, just public speaking is one of the most common fears/anxieties for people, so combine that with the fear of telling someone you like them, and well, I might not encourage such public methods, but I applaud the bravery of those who do so. Story 3. I'm a substitute teacher, and my favorite student with a blatant crush experience was with a second grade class. I picked the kids up from the yard after recess, and a boy came to me very upset because one of the girls had been chasing him the entire recess. Once we got back to class, I talked with the girl, asking for her side of the story. Conversation went something like this. Me. Jose was pretty upset about something that happened this recess. Do you want to tell me what happened? Girl. We were playing. Me. He said you were chasing him, is that true? Girl. Slight blush. Yeah. Me. Do you think he wanted you to be chasing him? Girl. No. Me. If you knew he didn't want to be chased, why were you chasing him? Girl. Huge blush, guilty smile, and hunched shoulders. He makes me laugh. Story 4. Former 6th grade teacher here. I was there to witness one of my kids take his first big leap. At lunch, he asked the girl he had a crush on, "Will you go on a date with me?" She smiled and said yes. Immediately, the boy on the other side of her said, "Don't go out with this ducker, go out with me." She smiled and said, "Okay." Middle school is tough, man. Story 5. I teach 10th grade. When I was a student teaching at age 21, I was really well liked, and the students told me a lot of personal stuff, probably because my age made me more approachable to 15 to 16-year-olds. One girl, C, would spend her study hall in my classroom during my planning period along with about 5 other students who just wanted to get out of study hall. She told me that she liked a boy, S, who also hung out in my class at that time. From then on, I used to group them together in class on purpose to get her to talk to him and give them an opportunity to spend some time together. I would always encourage her to ask him to hang out or tell her about things he was interested in so she could start conversations with him about it. She loved him. I think he saw her as a friend, but was generally clueless about her feelings. The saddest moment between the two of them was during my planning period / their study hall. Some of the other kids that hung out in my room during that time were off running errands for me, so it was just C, S, and I in the classroom. She was a pretty overweight girl, and she was sitting on the desk, part of those dumb classroom desks, and the desk completely gave out, breaking and sending her falling to the ground. I immediately shooed S out of the room, sending him to get the maintenance guy to get the desk out. When S was gone, C started bawling and was absolutely mortified. I knew she would be, which is why I sent S away quickly. I talked her through the embarrassment, and by the time S got back, C was cool as a effing cucumber and totally brushed it off. We went back to normal conversation, and I'm sure S forgot about it within minutes. My student teaching ended about a month later, so I'm not sure if anything became of C and S, but I definitely still think about them sometimes. Hey, Teach, cool on you for having that girl's back and giving opportunity and encouragement without being pushy or nosy or anything. It sounds like you were a really supportive and awesome student teacher, and I'm sure you're an even better teacher these days. Story 6. Teacher of high school freshman here. It's very easy. Saddest story? 2 houses, both alike. Sorry, it was a couple of years ago. Girl was quiet, charming, and very bright. Boy was disruptive, but the good kind of disruptive. The pleasure to have in class disruptive. Very funny. It became very clear to me that she was crushing on him something fierce. I, for what it was worth, blessed this potential union. This went on for several months. Then one day she storms into my room in a huff, declaring her anger at him. As I'm going around the room later that day, I catch him writing a lengthy letter to her. At a glance, it explained how he thought she was a really nice girl and all, but it would be perhaps best if they remained only friends. I assumed she had made a move. It didn't pay off. Over the next few days, I saw more mournful and longing looks than I ever wanted. Each one broke my heart. By the end of the year, they had patched it up, yet I still caught the occasional twinge of sadness in her eye. She may still hope to this day, and I still hope too. Story 7. Depends on the age, but the signs are obvious as hell. Lots of staring and not so obvious but very obvious attempts at being near them. Visible disappointment when they aren't put in the same group for group work. Jealousy in all forms. I've seen a kid hate a classmate for weeks because that classmate sat next to the kid's crush for the morning meeting. Ah, to be young and experience emotions as fully and wildly as teens. It isn't easy, but it certainly was just everything in those days. Not to say romance dies away as you get older, far from it. It's just crushes aren't nearly so all-encompassing. To my younger viewers, your feelings are tough but valid. Enjoy the blissful parts and try not to let jealousy, rejection, and the worst parts of it get you down. Story 8. Computer science / computational physics university lecturer here. Men tend to outnumber women 10 to 1 in my lecture groups. This has resulted in some odd scenarios. My favorite being 4 of my students simultaneously being exceedingly into the same exceedingly pretty woman who was in the realms of shy but unremittently kind. She also happened to be a lesbian. I knew this, they did not. Of course, only 2 people could sit next to her in a lecture theater, and an actual friend of hers usually took one of those spots. So the 4 of them would try to play it cool as she sat down, then desperately try to get as close as possible without giving the game away, like a single round of musical chairs where only one person can win. But there's definitely never going to be a prize any of the players want. It's important to also be aware that these were nerds of the highest order, so at a certain point they were just running and shoving one another, charging down the aisle like the adults they apparently were. I was eventually forced to intervene and end the game when one of them, honest to God, vaulted a row of seats and nearly landed on another student. They deliberately avoided her after I pulled them aside, which was probably great for her, but terrible for me. I found their fruitless game a never-ending source of comedy. Story 9. Super obvious. When a girl says, "Stop!" while laughing at a guy who's teasing her, or a guy goes out of his way to make fun of her / steal something of hers, so she'll have to pursue him to get it back. It makes me 100% certain. Story 10. It is painfully obvious most of the time. Here are some things I saw. Continuous glances at the same person, body language that positions the person closer to the other person, interjecting into a conversation that the person was not engaged in to begin with, being helpful more so for a person than for anyone else in class, flirting, obviously, boastful storytelling, a lot of times it is outlandish and very obviously untrue, hanging around the other person uninvited, and checking out the other person while oblivious to their surroundings. What is funny is that most people think they're being sneaky or inconspicuous. From my vantage point in the front of the classroom, these things seemed so obvious as to be genuinely painful to observe. It was especially painful when the feelings were intentionally unreciprocated. I taught college for a bit. It really is wild to get older and think back at how absolutely cringy and obvious you were as a teen in love. Like, holy crap, I think back before I was Mr. Facts and was just a young factoid, and there is a part of me that just wants to slap younger me. Like, dude, stop giving that girl a massage every day at play practice. What are you doing now? Seeing how close you can get to kissing this guy as a joke? Yeah, sure, a joke. Going to admit some stuff to yourself in about 10 years. Story 11. Shout out to my high school econ teacher for noticing that me and a girl were into each other, constantly putting us in the same group, straight up asking the girl if she had a boyfriend while I was in the room. Mrs. Anderson is the best wingman of all time. Story 12. Teenagers are not subtle by nature, but they are amazingly oblivious when it comes to matters of the heart. They are really perceptive with other things, though. The boys almost never recognize if a girl likes them, and the girls never realize a guy is showing interest. It's funny to watch it happen. It's so blatantly obvious as an outsider, but I remember being just as oblivious as a student. It's called crushing self-doubt. I had a girl literally ask me out, and I slept on it and convinced myself she was just effing with me in an attempt to embarrass me. Story 13. In middle school, they just started trying to get on each other's nerves more and are usually overly smiley. The main problem comes when only one of them is smiley. Story 14. I once had a teacher tell me that my crush and I worked together well, and I used him and I as an example of something. We ended up together, and she said, "Aw, I so predicted it." Seeing the reaction on her face was priceless, and I'll never forget it. So apparently, we were very obvious. Story 15. Everything with students is obvious. I know who you have a crush on. I know when you and your friend got in a fight and aren't the same today. I know when you're having a bad week. I know when you've lost motivation. I know when you're looking for attention. And I know when you want to be left alone. Some teachers use this information to make informed decisions like sitting you next to your crush, cutting you slack that day, asking if everything is all right, etc. But I've seen some use it to be unfair to students. It is true, teenagers are really easy to read with a lot of this stuff, but it isn't your fault. Cripes, we put you in the most socially dense and demanding setting possible right when you're dealing with just a flood of hormones and developing everythings. Nobody could possibly expect you to be any other way, so don't let any old dorks like me make you feel bad about being that way, because I promise we were too. Story 16. I teach preschool. They tend to lack any sort of filter, so they'll just say it outright, sometimes to me, sometimes to their crush. "Matthew is my boyfriend," or "Let's get married, Julia." They will also occasionally try to kiss their crush. Today, one of my students, Gavin, kissed my hand and proposed. He's 4. It was adorable. I almost wish adult men were as upfront, although I think I'd be a bit freaked out with a proposal. Little kids, no shame, all game. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.